camera. You give it to me. Give it off. Give it off. Down.
Give it. Magic tricks are difficult to convey well on film. We're so used to being hoodwinked by CGI and editing that even a trick portrayed in real time without any machinations aiding it can be hard to believe. But that didn't stop a pair of filmmakers from attempting to make movies based around stage magicians. We're talking, of course, about The Illusionist and The Prestige, both of which feature obsessive magicians plying their trade at the end of the 19th century, which both hit theaters here in the States 2 months apart in late 2006. As with so many other pairs of similarly themed films that come out at the same time, audiences were somewhat divided in their attentions, leading neither to be an outstanding success. Critics seem to also call the contest a bit of a toss-up, with both films coming in for remarkably similar scores on both Rotten Tomatoes and Metacritic. With that said, thanks in part to the increasingly high-profile career of Christopher Nolan, The Prestige has probably become the more well-liked, or at least well-remembered of the two films. That doesn't mean that we can't examine them both for their strengths and weaknesses, as we will endeavor to do here on this latest edition of Sidegrades. In The Illusionist, a young, mysterious sorcerer, the great Eisenheim, attempts to return to Vienna years after leaving town to learn the ways of the world. He returns with an almost mystical ability to ply tricks that have never been seen before, and also wishes to earn back his forbidden love, a duchess who's linked to the abusive crown prince.
That's enough flight entertainment for this evening.
That obsession is mirrored in The Prestige, which features a pair of magicians, Borden and Angier, whose competition escalates with ultimately deadly consequences, as each of them seek to one-up the other as well as learning the secrets of each other's greatest trick.
I am here because he sent me here. He wants me to come and work for you and steal your secret.
They're both perfectly watchable films, but only one can be declared the winner by the ultimate arbiter of quality. And who am I talking about?
It's science.
With no further ado, let's let the side grades begin. But be warned that spoilers will be flowing thick and heavy from this point forward. Worst accent. The competitors here are Scarlett Johansson and Jessica Biel, although you could probably throw Edward Norton in here as well, since his Viennese accent, while consistent, is also almost unbearably fey.
Yes, all right. I'll show you one I'm very fond of. Are you a gambling man?
Still, there's something about watching American actresses attempt to take on accents that is almost always discomforting.
I don't really have anywhere to go.
Unless we're talking about someone on the level of Meryl Streep. Biel and Johansson were both more likely hired to be pretty faces on the posters, but still, neither of them seem all that believable with their awkward European accents.
He knows I work for you.
Johansson seems to be just a little bit better overall, but we have to give Biel a bit of credit for coming into the production at the last second when Liv Tyler dropped out of The Illusionist, giving her a bit of a pity bonus in my book.
As long as we're alive, he'll hunt us.
As such, I'm going to call this one an even tie at 5 out of 10 per movie. Best Creepy Millionaire. Rufus Sewell in The Illusionist is Crown Prince Leopold, a wife-beater and possible murderer who winds up being Eisenheim's chief rival.
You will not share my bet if you have slept with him.
Both for the affection of the Duchess, but also when he attempts to shut down Eisenheim's theater by claiming that he's made personal threats against him. Sewell chews into the villain role with aplomb, coming across as a believably shitty bastard, even if he's not quite on the level of unlikableness that he managed to achieve in A Knight's Tale. He also takes the most convenient way out of his problem imaginable by committing suicide just when things seem to be going worst for him, leaving our heroes to escape scot-free without ever worrying about the big bad guy ever again. 6 out of 10 for The Illusionist. Still, he's up against none other than Nikola Tesla in The Prestige, whose presence was one of the few rough spots in the film for many viewers. For a film that goes to great lengths to ensure that the audience believes that these men are pulling off incredible but attainable magic, the inclusion of sci-fi trickery was a bit of a leap. That's no fault at all of David Bowie, however, who's marvelously understated but indelibly memorable in just a few minutes of screen time.
So, this is the great Denton. Mr. Ellie has effused about your acting on any number of occasions.
It's a great, fun cameo by an actor who is possibly better in small doses than in starring roles, and he's also joined by Andy Serkis in a fun, small role as his cat-loving assistant. So the winner is The Prestige with 8 out of 10 points. Best Magic Trick. The best magic trick in The Prestige is Borden's Transporting Man, one that's over in seconds, so quickly in fact that its audience doesn't even understand what has happened.
Was it good?
It was the greatest magic trick I've ever seen.
It is, of course, a trick that is simple, but not easy, as Borden explains later in the film.
Were you the one who went into the box, or the one who came back out? We took turns.
And while it might not be the proximate cause of the rivalry between he and Angier, it is the central trick that causes the deadly game of one-upsmanship that ultimately spirals far, far out of control. While Angier's version of the trick is ultimately the more showman-like, it's also aided by technical trickery and a basement full of corpses, making the original still the best, if only because it was the result of a lifetime of complete discipline on the part of Borden and his twin brother. It's a realization that the film leads up to slowly and is one of the better and more impactful twists of the last decade of filmmaking. It might not look like much when you first see it, but as a driver for the plot, it is almost perfect.
We each loved one of them.
9 out of 10 for The Prestige. In The Illusionist, on the other hand, we're meant to believe that most of Eisenheim's tricks are things that can actually be performed on stage, as was the case with the famous orange tree illusion that Harry Houdini used to pull off. Many of the tricks in the film, however, feel like somewhat exaggeratedly CGI'd version of those real illusions. It's understandable that the film version of the orange tree would need to feel a lot more meaningful than the real version, but in the end, the film goes a bit too far and we're less likely to believe in Eisenheim as a magician than we are to believe he simply had a pretty decent special effects budget.
I assure you they're quite real.
And that's a 4 out of 10 for The Illusionist.
And you, madam, where is your handkerchief?
Best death. Eisenheim's plot in The Illusionist involves faking the Duchess's death and framing the Crown Prince for it. It's a plot that involves obtaining his sword, somehow removing precious gemstones from it, knowing precisely where he'd be when he has a fight with the Duchess, drugging him and knowing precisely what he'd do and where he'd go afterward, having the Duchess fake her own death by lying in a creek for hours with no guarantee that anyone would find her before she drowns or freezes to death, having his henchmen spirit her corpse away without anyone noticing that it's gone, planting the evidence of the prince's involvement just so the police chief would find it, and then hoping he'll commit suicide. Sounds mildly far-fetched, and that's because it is in fact totally ridiculous. Even if we do get a mild satisfaction at watching the police chief realize the enormity of the act at the very end of the movie. Still, it's kind of dumb. 3 out of 10.
Behind all this?
The Prestige has multiple deaths involved in it, as both men's wives pay the price for their husband's desires to be the ultimate magician. Their deaths are tragic and avoidable, but then so are the deaths of the magicians themselves. Borden is ultimately hanged for the murder of Angier, although Angier reveals himself to still be alive, having made it seem that Borden was responsible for the murder of one of his own doubles, 100 of which were drowned so that Angier could claim his title as the leading magician of the age. In the end, though, Borden's twin, who we might as well call Borden as well, has the last laugh, as he reveals that his right-hand man, Fallon, was just his twin in disguise all along and shoots Angier. It is a movie with a technical body count in the hundreds, each of them a small tragedy. In the end, though, the death of Borden so that his brother might live on with his daughter is one of the film's more poignant moments. 8 out of 10. I come down pretty firmly on the side of The Prestige in this battle of similar movies. There are valid complaints that one can level against the film, especially in its reliance on symmetry to make its points, but it's still a supremely well-crafted movie about the ultimate price of obsession and the dedication that's required to be the best. The Illusionist, by comparison, feels like it's just a bit too much of a standard thriller, complete with a convoluted fake death plot that wouldn't be too out of place in a lesser M. Night Shyamalan work. Ultimately, the central plot even has little to do with magic itself, with Eisenheim's plot relying more on drugs and plotting than sleight of hand or illusion. That's a bit of a disappointment, and that's why The Prestige wins this battle of Sidegrades handily by a score of 30-18.
It's science.
While their subject matters might be similar, The Prestige seems like it'll be the film that's still talked about and remembered in a decade or so. whereas it's hard to find people who are still passionate about The Illusionist a mere 5 years after its release. All this talk about the Prestige makes me feel like doing a besties on it, so I'm sure I'll have more to say about it at some point in the future. In the meantime, this is one Sidegrades that I'm sure everyone has something to say about. So please do leave us a message in the comments section below to weigh in on the greatest cinematic debate of the 21st century. We'll see you soon.